In this video, I want to give you some introductory material for the Gospel of Luke that I think will be beneficial as you begin reading it. So, some background information on Luke. The author is Luke. He was a physician and a historian, and he was also a friend and companion of Paul. Luke may be one of my favorite Gospels because of his commitment to history and his commitment to detail. And so I think you will find that Luke is a very fun read because for the first time, this Gospel is a little more chronological than the other three. And so it's maybe more similar to a biography than the other Gospels have been. So he's writing to Theophilus, who is a well-known Roman official, so he is writing to a Gentile. And then he probably also had in mind a wider Gentile audience. So he probably knew that Theophilus would pass this on to other Gentiles. But it seems that he writes to an audience that is very familiar with Greek culture and Jewish culture. So he's not necessarily writing to a Jewish audience like Matthew did, but he is writing to a Gentile audience that understands both of these cultures. It is believed to be dated around 60 AD, and this would be happening before James is martyred, but after Paul is arrested. So, okay, what sets the Gospel of Luke apart? Luke's purpose for writing is to assure believers of the historical truth of their faith. God's great plan of salvation has come about through Jesus' life and death. So basically, Luke is making this apologetic through his gospel that what the people have heard about Jesus is true. It really is true events in history. For them, much more recent history. But these are true events, and they are events brought about by God. So they were ordained by God to bring about his great plan of salvation. And this is all coming to fruition through Jesus' life and death. So Luke is actually a two-part volume. So Luke first writes the gospel in his name, and then he also writes the book of Acts, which you will be studying, I think, next week, that details the genesis of the early church. And so it's cool to see, how Luke just kind of has combined, well, not combined, but how Luke has given this very full story of here is Jesus and his life, and then here is a result of his life and resurrection through the coming about of the early church. So I've touched on this earlier, but Luke has a pretty big emphasis on outsiders and women and how the gospel or the good news of Jesus bringing salvation is for these outsiders too. It is for the ones that maybe society looks down upon, or maybe has disability, or whatever the case. Luke wants to emphasize that the salvation that comes about through Jesus is for all people, no matter what. Luke uses Mark's gospel, which we've talked about, Mark's gospel being the first to be written, the earliest. It's believed that Luke uses portions of Mark's gospel as material as he is writing his gospel. And then, as I touched on already, this gospel, compared to the other three, is more reliable in terms of chronology. So you can think more of Luke is saying this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Okay, so in this one, it's more based around chronology rather than themes, as it is in some of the other Gospels. And then finally, Luke includes more parables than any other Gospel. 24 parables, and 18 of them are unique to being only in Luke's Gospel. Interesting facts. So when you combine the length of Luke and the second part of his 2-volume work, Acts, Luke actually has written more of the New Testament than any other New Testament author, including Paul. So Paul has more letters or books attributed to him, but in terms of length, Luke wins. And then, second, Luke's gospel has the finest stylistic Greek in the New Testament. So, Luke was a very skilled, technical, detailed writer that uses very impressive style and vocabulary in the Greek language. And the only other book that rivals this refined style is the book of Hebrews. Okay, so as far as the structure of Luke, you can think of 5 major sections. The births of John and Jesus, that's John the Baptist, the prep for Jesus' ministry, the time throughout Jesus' ministry when he is residing in Galilee, and then his journey to Jerusalem, and then lastly, Luke details the time that Jesus is in Jerusalem, which includes his death and resurrection. So, Luke's portrayal of Jesus of Nazareth, first, he is redefining the people of God. So, partially that goes back to, as I said, that salvation is for all, but also showing that through Jesus, God is doing something new, and it's a continuation of the Old Testament. You know, Abraham and Moses are still part of the story, but now the people should see Jesus as the center of the story rather than any of these Old Testament characters. And then, as I've touched on, salvation is open and available for all. And then finally, Luke wants to show that Jesus is a true historical figure. And one thing to note on that, so you can see that Luke includes a lot of details to orient you in the historicity of Jesus by including when, like, different things, events that were happening in the known world at that time, so that you can see, this is where Jesus is in history. Like, this is what is going on in the world around him. And then finally, Luke wants to show that Jesus is a teacher. He includes many of his teaching moments amongst the crowds. And then finally, the message of Luke. So Luke actually uses the word salvation more often than any of the other Gospels. And then, of course, the big theme being that Luke wants to show that salvation is available for all, not just for the Jews. Another big theme is discipleship, and that would just be how does one live when they are a follower of Jesus? What does this involve? What does it cost? And then finally, there are some happy themes on joy and praise, because salvation is here through Jesus, and then also prayer. So there you go. That is just a quick look at some background information on Luke. I hope you thoroughly enjoy reading this gospel.